Well, thank you so much for joining us on Chasing Life. How are you feeling this morning?
Never better.
Yeah? Tell me
Yeah.
more.
I don't know. I mean, I got up, worked out. What could be better?
What did you do to work out?
Lift. Today was a lift day.
What is your routine, like weekly routine?
I try to lift 3 days a week, and I try to run 3 days a week. And I try to base the running, which I think is like a privilege because my knees don't always hold up for it. So that's my treat. And I try to do the running on like particularly hard days because I find like the cardio gives you like way more endorphins. So that's my routine.
So do you not have as many endorphins today then for this interview?
I don't need them. I'm just high on the idea of talking to you.
Well, congratulations on writing the book.
Thank you.
I'm curious, just as a fellow author, at the very beginning stages when you decided to write this, what was going through your mind? I mean, how did you begin the process? What were you hoping to get out of it?
There were two main ideas of writing Born Lucky. One is to give hope to every parent of a kid who is struggling the way I did. Number two, on just a deeply personal point, is I wanted my dad to understand the incredible gratitude that I have and understanding I have for all of the sacrifices he made. And again, he didn't tell me about my diagnosis till I was in my 20s, didn't tell therapists, didn't tell teachers, anything like that. We never talked about it. But just one example, interviewing him for the book, he didn't actually tell me the story, my mom did. Every night from 4th to about 9th, 10th, 11th grade, he would spend a couple of hours in my room just sort of putting me back together. And I would sort of take out whatever the emotional toll of the day, of the isolation and the bullying and the sort of crushing torture, I think would be probably a pretty good word, the emotional torture I was going through on him. And I didn't know till we wrote the book that oftentimes he would leave my room. It was 10 o'clock at night. I'd probably be doing homework or I'd go to sleep. He would walk downstairs in our house and he would sit in the living room by himself and start crying. And my mom would then come out and find him in the living room 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I think one of the stories of Born Lucky is exactly how dealing with a kid who's having a hard time is a whole of family experience. And I wanted my dad to understand while he was still with us, that I understood the sacrifices and was so grateful for him that he had made.
That's incredibly touching. I have kids around the age you were at the time you're describing the story, and I think that as soon as you're talking, every kid is different, but I think for every parent listening, there's a resonance there. Maybe not for the exact same thing, but the things that we hold deeply that we may even insulate our kids from. Was it the right thing? I mean, obviously it was. And by the way, in some ways, this is an incredible book about you and your father and your relationship. And he writes the afterword. And how did that? Did you ask him? I mean, I'm sure he read it ahead of time before it was published and maybe gave you feedback. How did that process go?
You're nice to ask. I think the afterword's the best part, right? The foreword is written by George Will, who says, this is proof of the mountain-moving power of parental love. And my dad wrote the afterword. And the way this came about, Sanjay, is Born Lucky was never going to be written because this was a private story about me. And we never told anybody about this. Born Lucky is the darkest, most awful times of my life. And I never went to therapy as a kid. And now at 43, I'm going to therapy on national television, which is not exactly a bucket of fun. But if it can help other people, let's do it. Every time I would get to a story with my dad, whether it was him crying after he put me to bed, or if it was the time the art teacher who didn't like my paintings in 8th grade said in front of the entire class, you know what, Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I would shave its ass and make it walk backwards. Whatever the story was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
There's a few of those in Born Lucky. So it wasn't just the kids doing the bullying, it was the teachers too. But whatever it was, my dad would be going, oh, wait a second here. Do we really want to tell that story? Like, this is really private. What do we think? And I said, Dad, this isn't going to work. You're going to be as raw and as open with me as you possibly can be. I'm going to write the manuscript with Don. And when we get done, if you don't like it, we won't turn it into HarperCollins. And as you know, as an author, you got a book contract, you need to turn something in. So I didn't have a plan if he said no, but I gave him the manuscript. He read it, he wasn't sure about it. And I said, look, Dad, I said, let me take you back to that time I was diagnosed. And the woman said, there's not much you can do and there's no hope. If rather than saying there was no hope, she had given you Born Lucky, how would you have felt? And he said, I would have read it every week. But I still don't know what makes me too much of a hero. I'm not a hero, I'm just a dad. I said, well, you're my hero. And I think a lot of people are going to read this and feel like, the effort and the love you put forward was incredible. I said, why don't you write an afterword of your thoughts? Because I don't want to give advice to people. You write what you want parents in the same position you were in. Doesn't matter if it's autism or ADHD or anxiety or bullying, whatever it is, just parents with a kid who's having a hard time. What would you have wanted a parent to say to you? And he said, okay. And I think it was like we had turned the manuscript in on a Friday. And on Wednesday night, I called him and I said, you have got to do this. And he goes, I'm doing it. I said, no, now, sit down and do it. And an hour later, he called me with, I think, sort of like, as you were talked about, like 500 of the most beautiful words I've ever read.
The hesitation for him to allow you, it sounds like, to be so vulnerable was also part of that parental love. Yeah. You can understand it. Now that you've written the book, it's out there. I see you in a lot of places, a documentary, and obviously a lot of discussion about autism in the news lately as well, which we'll talk about. But was he happy ultimately? Did he, what was his?
It's a great question. And I think what's so remarkable about the Born Lucky story, right, is I have done TV hits on everybody from Steve Bannon to Morning Joe. And they have been universally happy, and the hosts have been crying at the end of the interview. So, find something in today's world that both Steve Bannon and Joe Scarborough, number one, agree on, and number two, start crying about. Not because of me, but because of what the Born Lucky story says about hope for parents and parental love and the power of that. And it's a powerful and uniting message. And I think the thing that Dad has loved the most isn't me talking about it, but I've forwarded him all the emails I've gotten, hundreds of emails from families who say, I'm not alone. I'm going to try something new with my kid. I'm going to redouble my efforts to try and connect and help my kid be more rather than just meet them where they're at. And that, to Dad, I think has proven that it's worth it, because we're really, I really feel and know that we're helping people. I've had parents of profoundly autistic kids email me. I've had parents of kids who have peanut allergies email me. I've had parents of kids who are just going through bullying email me. And that has been really meaningful to him.
How different would you say the landscape is for a child who receives the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, today's diagnosis, versus in the 80s when you had your diagnosis?
Look, I don't know, because I'm not a parent, right? So I think it's obviously very, very different. The part I think that is also different is that there's so much of an effort now, whether it's autism or ADHD or anxiety or whatever the diagnosis is, to tell parents just to sort of meet kids where they're at, right? And just be like, well, everybody's special and we have to celebrate everybody's differences. And that may work for some people, it may not. This isn't a cure, this isn't advice. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not even a parent. But it's very clear that the way my dad approached me and the Born Lucky story of how he adapted me to the world and taught me, minute by minute, the social and emotional fabric that comes so naturally to other people, is a very different way of dealing with things than maybe in vogue today.
Could it work today, though? One of the things reading the book is your dad really resisted the idea of a label, as you've mentioned. He didn't want to label you anything. And would that, again, I fully realize, Leland, you're not a doctor, you're not the one actually taking care of these families, but would you recommend the same thing today?
I still today say, what my dad said, the standard's the standard, and that's what you're going to be judged on. So to me, I think not ever having that label either for other people to define me, but also for me to define myself and give myself an excuse has been a really important thing.
When you started getting into the the television business. Like this was the thing. I remember we were talking about you in one of the editorial meetings, and I thought to myself, I'm a neuroscientist, so I think a lot about the brain, and I think the TV business in some ways seems like it might be the most challenging. Like right now, you and I are on a screen, but I'm making direct eye contact with you. There's still an intimacy to it.
Yeah.
And even on television, there is that. Even though it's a lens and you're looking at a lens, you're interacting with people. It seems like it would be a challenging sort of career to pursue. How did that come about? And was it as challenging as you expected it to be? I mean, you're very good at it. I mean, you're very delightful to watch, and I think you give off a sense of empathy, and you're very knowledgeable. So all those things work. But like, take me behind the scenes, if you will, into your brain. Like, how's that working for you?
It's a great question, and I think sort of only somebody like you could pick up on it. It was interesting. I got a response from an email from somebody who worked with me at a station at the very beginning of my career when I was coming up through local news. He'd been a gentleman who clearly had tried to be nice to me, but in newsrooms when I was young, as people see in Born Lucky, I was having a really hard time. People put up signs around about me saying, intern should be seen, not heard. And people would try to bully me even in the newsroom. Almost had to leave one internship because of it and one job because of it. But this guy, he was there at my first real station, and he emailed me. He said, I always liked you. He said, and I have to apologize to you because I just didn't understand you. What I thought was rude was just sort of you becoming who you were. So there was the newsroom internal dynamics that were quite hard. The way that this book came about was actually because of a talent coach, Sanjay, and I was with News Nation for a couple of months. I was starting to become a primetime anchor. I was when News Nation was starting out, and it was a big transition, right, from being a field reporter to being a anchor, especially a kind of nightly anchor rather than just daytime news that I did at Fox. And as she and I were talking, and she said, she said, the real challenge for you that I see is matching the emotional tenor of your guest. In the two box, which is what we're in right now, talking, right? And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. I mean, something my dad always talked about how to match someone's emotions and understand them and meet their emotions and think about that. And I was thinking about it, and I said to her, well, I've never told anybody this because I didn't think it really mattered, but you should know that that's about the hardest thing in the world for me to do, match someone's emotions, because I'm autistic. And she kind of didn't talk for 30 seconds. And I'm on the phone. I go, are you there? And she goes, uh-huh. She goes, did you say you were autistic? I said, uh-huh. She said, you ever told anybody that? I said, no, I didn't think it was ever relevant. But you are talking about this thing that I've worked on my whole life to do. It's really hard for me. So that actually became the genesis of the book. She was the one who really encouraged me to write the book and said, you're going to help so many people by writing it. But yeah, it's still a challenge. It's a learned skill. It's a discipline. It's a discipline and a skill, and it's gotten obviously a lot easier over time, but it's still very much there.
How do you work at it?
My dad from the very beginning, and this is in Born Lucky, right? He's realizing that I have absolutely no understanding of social interaction or of someone else's emotion, right? So he would take me to a lunch, say with you, right? Because I would have loved to go to lunch with you, and I was sort of interested in all these different things, and because I didn't have any friends my own age, he was my only friend. I was sort of a mini me, right? And I loved talking about news and events and politics and sort of anything that was interesting. And so we would go to lunch, right? And we would be sitting there, and you and he would be talking about, your kids or your wives or weekend plans or whatever. And I would interrupt and I would say, okay, well, so what do you do when you're in the OR and there's breaking news? Or how do you deal with when you're on TV and a patient calls? And then I'd say, but how do you figure out whether somebody has cancer and you need to do surgery or not? And I would just start blasting you with questions. And my dad would tap his watch, right? And that was my cue to stop talking without embarrassing me, and also to bookmark it. So on the way home, he would say, okay, so when Dr. Gupta was talking about, his wife's art project, I'm making this up. And you interrupted and asked about, his time in the operating room. Why did you think he wanted to talk about that right then? I don't know, Dad. That was sort of what was interesting to me. Well, what could you have asked Dr. Gupta about what he was interested in? And then we would role play that. So, I mean, that was the very basic of it. I mean, where I'm sort of talking about the foundational building blocks of it, but that was sort of teaching me the social and emotional interaction that comes so naturally to other people.
Did you get treated differently when the book came out in your workplace or among friends?
No, I mean, I think people sort of know who I am now in my workplace. My friends know who I am. I mean, I've had a couple people make pretty absurd comments. Fine. I had people make really absurd comments when I was in high school, or, beat me up when I was in high school. So it does, who cares? I struggled with, this idea that people would treat me differently, right? I'm the same person. I've just sort of now said, oh, by the way, this is part of my life. And I think, if I weigh it, I feel like the amount of people I've helped and the amount of people who've emailed me and said, you really helped me. And if we've done a few book events around the country, and there've been 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids come up to me and said, I know now I can get through school, and I now, seeing you tells me that it's going to be okay. And they're like, if people want to treat me differently, no problem. Like, that's on them.
Let's talk about the rest of your family. Your mom.
Yeah.
So you were breech. I think this is. I made some notes on this, but your mom made a pivotal decision
right
at the time of your birth. Can you just talk about that?
Sure, and that's where the title of the book comes from. Is Born Lucky. My nickname is Lucky, and up until I was 18 years old, I would have introduced myself as Lucky, and people would say why, and I never really told the story, but until the book. But my mother's 35. This is 1982, high risk pregnancy, and the doctor says to my mother, "I've got a bad feeling about this." They could see on the ultrasounds even back then that I was upside down. I was breech. So the doctor says to my mom, "I think you should have a C-section." And at the time, there was all this literature, C-sections are, sort of not really needed, and it was in vogue to have a natural birth, and doctors were scheduling C-sections because they didn't want to be called in at 3:00 on a Saturday morning, all the usual stuff. My mom made a very fateful decision. If I'm not going to trust my doctor, I should get a new doctor, not take his advice. She's in the operating room. They're delivering me. This is the part of the book I don't remember. There's a blue sheet sort of separating my mom and dad from where they're delivering me. And the doctor who's delivering me goes, "Oh my God. Oh my God." And the nurse goes, "Oh my God, this is a lucky baby." And of course, my mom's hand just like clenches down on my dad, and everything okay. And the doctor says, "Give us a minute." And then my dad, and then they go, "Oh my God, what a lucky baby." And my dad now goes, "Is everything okay?" And the doctor goes, yeah, it's fine. Give us a minute. And what it turned out was the umbilical cord was tied around my neck and in 2 knots. So I would have either been dead or had severe cerebral palsy. Fast forward to the next day, I'm now, up in the little, whatever maternity ward or whatever it is with my mom in the room. And there was this whiteboard outside that said Carol Vitter, Leland Vitter outside the room, like the last time I pooped, what I ate, what I weighed, whatever it is. And the doctor came by with a Sharpie and crossed out Leland Vitter and wrote, "Call him Lucky." So the doctor really, who delivered me, named me.
That's kind of incredible.
It's a fun story.
And your mom had to make this decision, this pivotal decision in her life. I think there's so many lessons in this book. I hope everyone gets a chance to read it. Your grandfather, I think this is page 29, wrote a letter to your father.
Yep. One of the 2 things Dad taught me early on that I could control in Born Lucky, right? I wasn't going to be good at school. I wasn't going to be good at having friends. I wasn't going to be good at athletics. He said, you can control 2 things, your work ethic and your character. And to him, character is destiny. And the reason was that when he was 16 years old, his dad died. He was shaving, getting ready for a date upstairs in his bathroom, and his brother, who was much older, my uncle, 10 years older, showed up. My dad said, "Bruce, why are you here?" And Bruce said, "Our dad died about an hour ago." And with that, Bruce took my dad down to the family construction company. There was a little office building down in St. Louis. And they opened up the safe in the office. And in the safe was a letter from my grandfather to his two boys, my dad and his brother. And we have the letter in the book, as you saw. And the letter talks about how character is destiny and how you as a man are not defined by your success or your accolades or your monetary worth.
A shelf full of awards.
Anything. It is who you are as a man, your character. So that is the lesson that I think really sort of permeates through the book, and obviously then sort of culminates at the end with my time at Fox News ending because I did what I thought was right and said what I knew to be true about the 2020 election, that Biden won and Trump did not, and there was no, fraud and all that kind of stuff. So I think that through line of do the right thing no matter what was a lesson that I wanted to really highlight that came down from my grandfather to my dad to me.
He wrote, "It didn't just tell you how to live, it gave you something to measure yourself against, setting goals, achievable, articulate goals," as he called them. And then once you set those, work like hell to achieve those. And it became more than just words on a piece of paper. Your dad carried it in his wallet ever since then. And it seems like in many ways it was the map that he used to help you as well.
Right. And look, in terms of hard work, my dad, when I was diagnosed, effectively quit his job. He was an entrepreneur. He had a number of companies.
He was sort of a media mogul, right? I mean, he
was he was in media. He was in soft drinks, IBC root beer.
Right.
He was in sporting goods, all sorts of. He was just an entrepreneur. He started a number of newspapers that called the business journals, the Atlanta Business Journal, St. Louis Business Journal, all those. He said, "I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I knew I was your only chance." So it was on faith.
Sounds like an incredible guy. This is the book's fantastic. And I think, as you point out, a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. As a dad, that's the part that really, really resonated with me. And again, having kids that were your age, Leland, around the time that many of these stories took place, I really reflected on that a lot as I was reading this. So thank you for that part of it. What about your siblings? How were they during all this?
My sister, I only have one sibling. I have a little sister. She's the smart one. She went to MIT, has a PhD in math and all that kind of stuff. I always like to say that, the apples fell from the tree and her apple stayed up on the top of the orchard and mine ran down to like the drainage ditch. I didn't really realize how difficult what I was going through was on her. So I'll give you a couple of examples from Born Lucky. And I think from Born Lucky, there's a lot of families that'll realize how it's a whole of family effort and also the effect on siblings, right? So I asked my sister in interviewing her for the book, "What's your earliest memory of me?" Pretty simple question, right? She says, "Oh, that's easy." She said, "When you were in 5th grade and I was in kindergarten, every day you would walk from kindergarten from 5th grade down to the kindergarten classroom to pick me up to take me home. We would walk home together. So 3 o'clock, you'd show up and we would walk out of the school, around the back of the school to where the PE fields were, through the PE fields and out to the woods, which led to our house. There's a path back there. And she said, every time we got to the woods, you would start crying. And I would hold your hand as you walked, as we walked home every day. So she said, I didn't know why you were crying, but you were crying. And there were a number of teachers who said to her, I really hope you don't end up like your brother.
Jeez.
And she was known in her class as the retarded kid's brother. That's what they called her.
Wow.
Or the retarded kid's sister, or your retarded brother. And the school had this program where kids in 12th grade had little brothers and little sisters in 7th grade, right? An older classman to look out for you. And none of the girls in my class would have her as their little sister. Eventually, they just said, we're not going to do this because sort of the scarlet letter that she had because of me. So I thought it was really important in Born Lucky to highlight for people, yes, how hard it was on me, but how hard it was on Liberty. And you brought up my mom in this, who, as my dad said to me afterward, was the silent hero, the unsung, sort of the unsung angel, I think was his words. The book is about my dad's and my relationship, but it is also, I think, about how she kept us all together and then how she also spent a lot of time focused on Liberty to try and help make sure she didn't feel sort of neglected, as a lot of siblings with kids who are having a hard time or have a disability do. The one thing is, they never told my sister about me either. They never said, oh, Lucky's got this or he's struggling with that. It was always my mom's line to my sister was, Lucky kind of gets broken every day at school, and we as a family have to put him back together.
It's incredible. Did she read the book ahead of time as well?
Yeah, she complained that she wasn't in it enough.
Okay. Well, I feel like you did terrific tributes to many of your family members in it. Go back to this Fox News sort of era, and you use that as an example of the character. This letter was sent from your grandfather to your father. He carried it around in his wallet. One of the main through lines was, ultimately, you're measured by your character. And you use that as an example of what happened at the end of your time at Fox News.
Yeah, do the right thing, the consequences be damned. I was always taught by my dad, you tell the truth, you do what's right, no matter what. And this is after the 2020 election. It was a weekend, 2 or 3 weeks after the election that had been called for Joe Biden. And there was one of the Stop the Steal rallies in D.C., which, thousands of Trump supporters came. They were all chanting. So we had on, during the weekend show at Fox, one of Trump's spokespeople. And she was adamant that the election was stolen and every vote needed to be counted and on and on. And I kept pushing back on her. And it got combative of where's the proof? Where's the proof of fraud? How are you going to get to 270 electoral votes? On and on and on. All the reasonable questions. And she started screaming at me, and it went back and forth. I think it's probably just sort of my sense of fairness and fair play that I learned from my dad. Like, when people say things that aren't true, it just sort of grates on me. And I made it clear that I thought what she was saying was untrue. So after that, I was told I was never going to anchor again at Fox. So in Born Lucky, I'm there now in January, late January, early February of 2021. I'm gone from Fox News, sort of invited not to return. I almost died of COVID that month. I was in the hospital for about a week with COVID. My pulse ox, this will mean something to you and your listeners, was 78.
Wow.
And then I had ended a long-term relationship. So I didn't have a girlfriend or a place to live or anything. So I'm in my parents' guest bedroom in Florida feeling sorry for myself. And my dad comes in and he says, I understand you're feeling sorry for yourself. You're 38 years old. You have no job, no girlfriend, no place to live, and you almost died. I said, yeah, I feel pretty sorry for myself. He says, guess what? He said, you went back to school every day in 8th grade. You can do this too. And I think that was that great lesson from Born Lucky, which is embrace adversity. It's your friend. And so often now, parents want to remove all the adversity their kids go through, right? Where, it's hard for you to take a test. More time on the test. Oh, it's difficult for you to learn a language. Okay, never mind, because you're a learning disability, there's no language requirement, whatever it is. And my dad's philosophy was, life's hard, but I'm going to hold your hand through the adversity. We're going to walk through this together, and I'm going to help you get through, but I'm also going to teach you that you can do it. You can overcome it. You can fight. And I always say that what I didn't realize in 8th grade when I kept going back to school is how middle school is great training for a Washington newsroom.
I am curious. You obviously write the book, and that causes this period of intense reflection, I imagine, for you. At the time, though, going back to 8th grade or even high school, did you recognize the value of what your dad was telling you at that time?
Hell no. Hell no. I mean, I hated it. I hated every second. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you making me go back? Why can't, why can't I just quit? This is awful. Just get me out of here. And I was angry, really angry, a lot, and angry at him a lot. And, I think in that afterword, he talks about that, about how meaning parents are the repository of their children's hurt and anger. So no, he kept telling me it's going to get better, right? And I kind of didn't have a choice but to believe him, because otherwise, what's the point of this? But no, I did not. I guess there's not a lot of people who are in SEAL training and you go, oh my God, this is great. Like, I love this. But I'm obviously happy now that I went through it.
That was a tough time. I mean, living in your parents' guest house, almost died of COVID, trying to find a job, all of that. And now I ask you the first question during this podcast and you say never better, which makes me super happy because you're employed, you look fantastic, you're healthy, and you're married.
Yeah, married, got a great wife.
Last year you got married?
This year.
This year, okay.
This year. Rachel, I met her shortly after that moment that I told you about when I was so low on a blind date. And, I have, as the woman said, when she diagnosed me, I have, an emotional intelligence, probably something around the freezing level. Her emotional intelligence is about the temperature of the sun. So that helps. Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think also so much of life is attitude. So much of life is not being a victim because I've said this and I got some flack for it, but fine, I'll say it again. Victimhood is like fentanyl. It is both addictive and destructive. And that was the one thing my dad never let me be. You are not a victim. And you will not, you will fight and this is what is important. And I think that was a really total through line of my upbringing and probably of his too, but that the victim does not enter into the equation. And that's something that's always been really important.
Recently, autism has been in the news a fair amount. And I want to read you some.
You don't say.
I mean, it's kind of crazy. Just as a medical reporter, for 25 years, certainly I've been reporting on some of these topics and even, the speculation about vaccines, all this. But RFK's comments really sort of were jarring for me, even as someone who for a quarter century has been reporting on this. This is what he said about children with autism. They will never pay taxes. They will never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. You heard these comments.
I did.
What did you think?
I think for a lot of children, that's true. There's a lot of families who have children with profound autism for whom that is life, and their children are living in group homes, and they're hoping their kids can be more, and they're living, sort of hoping that their child's able to smile and recognize their parents and able to communicate just a little bit. So I think we have to be, honest that, as you pointed out, autism is a spectrum. I'm not an expert on it, but I've spoken now to a lot of families for whom that description is 100% true. There's also people like me. So all that said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I have the chemistry grades to prove it. If you'd like to see the report cards, I'd be happy to send them over. The basis for me as someone who grew up with autism, for whom growing up was hell because of it, who's seen the explosion in the cases of autism, for some, 1 in 1,500 when I was a kid, now 1 in 31, 3 times higher for boys, on and on and on. Put all that together, for someone who is recently married and now might have a child, or would like to have children with my wife, if we're blessed with them, great. But, science can't tell me if my child's going to be autistic. Science can't tell me what, if anything, I and my wife can do to prevent my child from being autistic. If you gave me a piece of paper and said, okay, Rachel's pregnant right now. Check autistic or not autistic. Not autistic, thank you. 1,000 out of 1,000 times. So to me, the fact that this is now being talked about, it's now being considered the scientific question of our time, I think is really important.
I fully realize that there are children who have profound autism. And I don't think that's in dispute. I think the idea that the characterization sometimes is this is what all kids with autism are like, to sort of catastrophize it in that way. I think you can't disentangle anything from politics nowadays, right?
Sure.
I fully realize that, but I have to say again, it was jarring.
I think it was jarring to a lot of people. I think the flip side is why Born Lucky has gotten the reception that it has from Steve Bannon to Joe Scarborough, and really everywhere in between. And I think you reading it as a father of kids who are doing great, had an effect on you is because it's a story of parental love. It doesn't really have in the power of parental love and the hope parents should have that their kids can be more. It's not a book about autism, right? It's a book about a father and a son.
Yes.
And that to me is what I really wanted it to be. I really wanted it to be a tribute, a love letter to my dad.
Well, you nailed that part. I got to say, again, it really from page one all the way through. I think everyone should read this. I think it's about father-son relationship. It's about relationships, and it's about reflection that you've had over, I guess, 43 years now. But certainly at that time period in your 20s and all that was happening in your life. I love it. By the way, the picture is behind you, and it's funny. I saw that picture initially, and I thought that was you.
Yeah, some people have said to me, I didn't know you had a kid.
Right. You and your father look very much alike. I don't know how old he was in that picture, but I guess...
I think he would have been a few years younger than I am now. So I'm 43 now. He had me when he was 35. So I guess he would have been 37 or so. Yeah,
he looks good. You both look good. Look, I was really looking forward to talking to you. It did not disappoint. I feel like I've been watching you for a long time, and I always enjoy it. I feel like I learned something from you, and it's nice to get.
I from you as well. I always appreciate turning the volume up. As you know, we all watch the TV with the volume off, and whenever you come on, I sit there and turn it up. So thank you.
Well, I'm going to do an extra good job now knowing that you're turning the volume up. Appreciate your time. Good luck on the show tonight. I know you probably got to go do some prep work. A lot going on in the world, but I really appreciate your time.
And yours. Thank you.